I was the only person who showed up at my husband's funeral. A full row of empty pews stretched before me as I stood beside Jeremiah's mahogany casket. The echo in that quiet room felt heavier than the coffin itself. Our children, Kaylin and Anea, had chosen vacations over farewells. Their absence screamed louder than any organ music could. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The young funeral director, who looked barely out of college, kept glancing nervously at the vacant seats. It was a dull, gray Monday morning in Atlanta, the kind where the sky couldn't decide whether to drizzle or hold back. Jeremiah hated indecision. "Mrs. Hampton, would you like to wait a few more minutes?" the man asked gently, checking his watch. "We can start," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Jeremiah couldn't stand delays. "Why start now?" The pastor began the service. He'd never met Jeremiah, and his words sounded as generic as a printed sympathy card. "A good man, a loving husband, a devoted father," he droned, while I stared at the bouquet of white lilies resting on the casket. Jeremiah would have hated them. He always preferred deep red roses from our backyard, the ones he'd trimmed with care for 43 years. I sat alone in the front pew. 5 empty chairs around me felt like ghosts of a family that once was. My children, their spouses, even my grandson Demani, none had come. Kaylin had sent a text the night before, "Sorry, Mom. Big meeting in Miami. Can't cancel. I'll call you next week." No attempt to come, no emotion, no goodbye. I imagined him sitting in some glossy boardroom, pretending not to think about his father's funeral 1,000 miles away. And Anea, she hadn't even texted. Her assistant had called instead. "Miss Hampton is indisposed and unable to travel." Indisposed. As though we were discussing a dinner party, not her father's final rest. When the short service ended, I followed the casket to the cemetery. The wind bit at my face, but I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel pain, I had simply run out of tears. I watched as the casket was lowered into the ground and tossed a handful of dirt onto it. The hollow thud echoed like footsteps in an empty house. Back home, I poured myself a glass of the good bourbon Jeremiah and I saved for celebrations. This wasn't one, but it felt necessary. The house was painfully still, his slippers by the recliner, the remote on the table, everything just as he'd left it. On impulse, I opened Instagram. The first post I saw stopped my breath. There was Anea, standing on a yacht, champagne glass raised, captioned, "Living my best life." 3 hours ago. Right when her father was being buried. My hands trembled. Then came Kaylin's post, a selfie in a sleek conference room, captioned, "Sealing deals, making moves." No mention of loss. No trace of grief. I shut off my phone and looked at the photo on the wall, our 40th anniversary, the roses in full bloom, Jeremiah smiling at me like he always did. That night, one thought echoed through my mind: tomorrow, I'm calling Attorney Owens. Because if my children couldn't stand by their father in death, maybe they no longer deserved to stand in his legacy either. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still cold and quiet, the kind of silence that makes you realize how much life used to live within those walls. Jeremiah's slippers were still by the recliner, and the faint scent of his aftershave lingered in the bedroom. I didn't have the strength to move anything yet. But I did know one thing: I was calling Attorney Owens. He'd been our family lawyer for over 30 years. A kind, patient man who had seen Jeremiah and me through buying our first home, setting up insurance, and eventually, drafting our will. Back then, it had seemed fair, half to Kaylin, half to Anea, and a small share to Demani. We'd trusted that love and gratitude would do the rest. At 9 a.m., I called his office. The secretary's tone softened when she heard my name. "Mrs. Hampton, I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Shonda," I replied. "I need to see the attorney today. It's urgent." She paused, then said, "He can see you at 10 tomorrow morning. Will that work?" Perfect. That night, I barely slept. Not because I doubted my decision, but because, for the first time in weeks, I felt clarity. I felt Jeremiah's presence as if he were sitting beside me, silently nodding in approval. When I arrived at the law office, the familiar smell of coffee and old books filled the air. Attorney Owen stood up as soon as I walked in. "Eliza," he said kindly, "I'm so sorry about Jeremiah. He was one of the good ones." "Thank you," I said, taking the seat across from him. "He truly was." He waited a moment, then asked gently, "What can I do for you today?" "I want to make changes to our will." He nodded, unsurprised. He'd seen grief bring clarity before. "Of course. What kind of changes?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I want Kaylin and Anaya removed completely. Everything goes to Demani." He blinked, taken aback. "Completely?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Every penny, every property, every account." He took off his glasses slowly. "Mrs. Hampton, I know this must be a difficult time. Are you sure you want to?" "I buried my husband alone, Mr. Owens," I interrupted, my voice calm but unwavering. "Our children didn't even send flowers. Kaylin was busy closing deals, and Anaya was on a yacht. Meanwhile, Demani called me every single day. He drove me to the hospital when I couldn't drive myself. He mowed the lawn when Jeremiah got too weak to stand. He was there." Attorney Owens was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood. I want the assets placed in a trust for Demani," I continued, "protected so his parents can't touch it. And I want him to have access only for education and medical needs until he's 30. "That's wise," he said, making notes. "I'll make sure it's structured securely. You'll be protected from any challenge." As I signed the preliminary papers, an unexpected calm settled over me. This wasn't about anger anymore, it was about justice. About honoring the man Jeremiah was, and ensuring his legacy went to someone who actually understood its value. Walking out of the office, I noticed a mother and daughter passing by, laughing about something small. I didn't feel envy, only a quiet ache. Family wasn't supposed to end this way. That night, as I poured another glass of bourbon, I whispered to Jeremiah's photo, "I did what you would have done." But I had no idea that this decision, the one I made in his name, would ignite a storm that would test the very meaning of family. When I came home from the lawyer's office, the house felt lighter. Not cheerful, but less suffocating, as if the walls themselves approved of what I'd done. It wasn't revenge that drove me. It was truth. For years, Jeremiah and I had quietly given and given, while our children took without once stopping to ask if we had enough left for ourselves. I walked to the small oak desk where we kept our papers, bills, deeds, old photographs, and memories filed neatly away. My fingers trembled as I opened the drawer that held our most private things. Inside, wrapped in a brown envelope, was the document Jeremiah and I had signed 2 years ago, our will. The moment I touched it, I felt the weight of those years pressing on me. We'd made that will during a peaceful summer afternoon, sitting at this very desk. Jeremiah had been recovering from a mild stroke, and we'd talked about what would happen if something ever went wrong. "Half for Kaylin, half for Anaya," Jeremiah had said with such conviction. "And something for Demani too, he's a good kid." I'd nodded, believing back then that fairness meant equality. But now I realized fairness was about merit. I closed the folder gently, like tucking away a ghost. My eyes wandered to the nightstand, Jeremiah's pill bottles still lined up in their neat row. The doctor had said it would be quick. It wasn't. 6 long months of hospital visits, slow decline, and cruel hope. 6 months where Kaylin visited twice, Anaya once. Always with excuses, work, deadlines, family commitments. When Jeremiah finally passed, it was a Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand when he opened his eyes and whispered, "You were always the best part of me, Eliza." Then his chest rose one final time, and stilled. That moment replayed endlessly in my head, sharp and clear, like a wound that never fully heals. After the funeral, the silence in this house grew unbearable. Every room echoed with memories. The breakfast nook still smelled faintly of the pancakes Jeremiah used to make every Sunday morning, always too many, always with the same hope, maybe the kids will drop by. They rarely did. Sometimes I think Jeremiah knew the truth long before I did. He just refused to say it out loud because love made him hopeful. I poured myself another small drink and sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared so many mornings. I remembered Jeremiah's laughter when the radio played old Motown hits. The way he'd hum along. I spoke into the empty room. They didn't come, Jeremiah. They didn't even call. The only response was the soft tick of the wall clock. That night, I wrote a note for myself and placed it under the old family photo on the mantel. It said simply, "Call Owens again once documents are ready. Do not hesitate." For the first time since Jeremiah died, I slept through the night. My dreams weren't peaceful, but they were clear. In them, I saw Jeremiah standing at the garden gate, his hands resting on the fence post, smiling that same knowing smile he always gave me when I finally did something he'd been quietly waiting for me to do. When I woke up, I whispered to the empty room, "You were right, love. It's time to stop waiting for them to change." But I didn't realize that changing the will was only the beginning, that my choice would soon pull every hidden truth in our family out into the light. The papers were ready by Thursday. When I walked into Attorney Owen's office that morning, I felt a strange sense of calm. The kind that comes after a storm, not because everything is fine, but because you've finally accepted what's broken. Attorney Owens greeted me with his usual warmth. "Mrs. Hampton," he said, standing as I entered, "everything's prepared. I just need your signature." He laid the documents on the desk between us. I took a deep breath before picking up the pen. "This will be confidential?" I asked. "Of course," he assured me. "Your children will only learn about these changes after your passing, unless you choose to tell them." "I'll tell them," I said quietly. "When the time comes." He nodded with a sympathetic smile. Most parents don't have the courage to follow through on such decisions. But sometimes, tough love is the truest kind. As my signature dried on the page, I felt the weight on my chest lift. It wasn't happiness, not even close, but it was relief. The kind that comes from doing what's right, even when it hurts. "It's done," he said, gathering the documents carefully. "Everything will now pass to your grandson, under the trust terms we discussed. No one else can access it." "Thank you," I said, rising slowly. "You've done more than you know." When I stepped outside, Atlanta's sky was cloudy again, but the air felt lighter. I took my time walking back to the car. A mother passed by holding her daughter's hand, their laughter carrying through the wind. I couldn't help but wonder if my own children ever remembered when we used to walk like that, when life was simple, when love didn't have to be earned. That evening, I came home to the same quiet house, but it no longer felt haunted. I poured myself tea instead of bourbon this time and sat by the window, watching the wind move the rose bushes Jeremiah had planted. A few petals had fallen, but the roots held strong. Jeremiah used to say, "The true strength of love is shown in what survives the seasons." I finally understood what he meant. I spent the next few hours cleaning out old drawers. I found Kaylin's report cards, crumpled art projects, and faded photos from birthday parties. Each memory was like a fragile piece of glass, beautiful but dangerous to hold too long. Then, at the very back of a drawer, I found two thick folders labeled Kaylin, Education and Business, and Anea, Personal Expenses. I hesitated, then opened them. The contents made my chest tighten. Receipts, checks, wire transfers, thousands upon thousands of dollars poured into their dreams. Kaylin's MBA tuition, his failed startup, the down payment on his big house. Anea's lavish wedding, her penthouse renovations, the business trips that were really vacations. Every time they had asked, Jeremiah had sighed, then said, "There are kids, Eliza. One day, they'll understand." That day never came. As I stared at those papers, I realized these weren't just financial records, they were a history of love given and taken for granted. I closed the folders and whispered, "You were wrong, Jeremiah. They didn't learn. Then I placed the files back in the drawer, not out of guilt, but as evidence, for my own heart, that I'd given enough. More than enough. I was done being their safety net. From now on, I'd honor the man who built everything we had, and the grandson who still remembered what it all meant. But before peace could settle, one phone call would shatter that fragile calm, and remind me that my children weren't done taking from me yet. The call came that night, right as I was washing the last of the dinner dishes. The sound of my ringtone felt almost foreign after days of silence. When I glanced at the screen, my heart clenched. It was Demoni. "Grandma," he said when I answered, his voice gentle as ever. "Can I stop by tomorrow? I found some books Grandpa would have loved." My throat tightened. "Of course, baby. Come for lunch. I'll make his favorite, lasagna." After we hung up, I stared out the kitchen window at the rose bushes swaying in the wind. Jeremiah had planted them the summer we moved in. He used to say the roses reminded him of family, beautiful, but full of thorns if you didn't handle them right. The next day, Demoni arrived right at noon, holding a canvas bag filled with old hardcovers. He looked so much like Jeremiah, same quiet eyes, same steady manner, that for a moment I couldn't speak. We ate in the backyard, just the two of us. He told me about his classes, his part-time job at a bookstore, and the graduate program he wanted to apply for. He spoke with a kind of modest hope that his parents never had. "I've been saving up," he said, "but the program costs a lot. I don't want to burden Mom or Dad. They already—" "Demoni," I interrupted softly, "how much is it?" He hesitated before naming a number that made me smile. It was less than a tenth of what I'd given his father for one failed business idea. "Apply," I said simply. "But Grandma, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," I said, reaching for his hand. "You've earned it." He didn't speak, just smiled and looked down, the way Jeremiah used to when he was proud but didn't want to show it. After he left, I lingered in the yard, listening to the sound of his old car fade down the street. My heart felt lighter than it had in months. For the first time, I saw a piece of Jeremiah's goodness living on in someone else. But that piece didn't last long. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, the name on the screen made my stomach drop, Anea. "Mom," she began, her tone clipped. "Demoni told me you're paying for his scholarship?" "No, hello? No, how are you?" I said quietly. "Good morning to you too, dear." She sighed. "I'm just worried about you. You just lost Dad, and now you're making financial decisions you might regret." "I've made several important financial decisions lately," I said, unable to resist. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully, her tone tightening. "Why don't you come visit me?" I suggested. "We can talk in person." "I'm really busy this week," she replied quickly. "You know how work gets." "Yes," I said. "That's why you couldn't make it to your father's funeral, because work got in the way, right?" Silence. Then, a stammered, "How did you?" "Instagram," I said simply. "You were smiling on a yacht while I buried your father." There was another long pause, followed by a weak, "Mom, that's not fair." "I'm done with fair, Anea," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Come talk to me when you remember how to be a daughter." I hung up before she could respond. My hands trembled, not from anger, but release. Years of holding my tongue, of pretending, of excusing, it all ended with that click. I turned off the lights, whispering to the photo on the wall, "They're finally going to learn, Jeremiah. One way or another." But I didn't know that before the week was over, Kalen would show up at my door, and he wouldn't be coming for comfort. He'd be coming for answers. Kalen arrived 2 days later without calling first, just like always. I saw his shiny imported car pull into the driveway, sunlight glinting off its spotless hood. He never parked straight. Jeremiah used to say it was symbolic, always halfway in, halfway out. When I opened the door, he greeted me with a brief hug that felt more like a formality than affection. Mom, you look tired, he said, stepping past me into the living room as if he still lived there. I'm fine, Kaylin, I replied evenly. What brings you here? He glanced around, scanning the room, the furniture, the framed photographs. Anaya told me about your conversation, he began cautiously. We're worried about you. I raised an eyebrow. Are you? Of course, he said quickly. Losing Dad, it's been hard on all of us. I imagine it has, I said softly. Though some of you seem to be handling it better than others. His jaw tightened, but he tried to keep his composure. Mom, about the funeral. I wanted to come, I really did. But that meeting was crucial, I finished for him. Yes, I read your post. Congratulations on the deal. He flinched slightly, caught off guard. That's not fair, he muttered. Neither was burying your father alone, I said. He fell silent. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock Jeremiah had fixed countless times. I motioned toward the sofa. Sit. He obeyed, looking uneasy, like a child about to be scolded. Kaylin, I began quietly, do you remember how much your father and I sacrificed to help you start your business? He nodded slowly. I do. Do you remember how much it was? He hesitated. Around 70,000. 75, I corrected. Plus another 120,000 for your house. 45 to clear your debts after your first divorce. And countless small transfers you never even acknowledged. He shifted in his seat, his polished confidence faltering. Why are we talking about this now? Because I'm taking inventory, I said calmly. Not just of our finances, but of our choices. He frowned. Mom, what are you saying? I modified the will, I said, my voice steady. You and your sister are no longer beneficiaries. Everything goes to Demoni. For a moment, his face went blank, as if he couldn't process the words. Then color rushed to his cheeks. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Demoni, he repeated, almost laughing. Mom, he's a kid. He doesn't know the first thing about managing money. He knows about responsibility, I said sharply. Something you and your sister seem to have forgotten. He stood up suddenly, pacing the floor. This is insane. You're grieving, you're not thinking straight. Oh, I'm thinking clearer than I have in years, I said, standing too. Your father built everything we have with integrity, Kaylin. You've built nothing but excuses. This isn't over, he said tightly. Anaya and I will contest it. You can try, I replied, meeting his gaze. But if you do, you'll only prove why you were removed in the first place. He stared at me for a long moment, his anger flickering between disbelief and shame. Then, without another word, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I watched from the window as he got into his car, immediately pulling out his phone. No doubt calling his sister. The storm had officially begun. I poured myself a small drink and stepped out into the garden, the autumn air biting at my skin. The roses Jeremiah planted were beginning to fade, but a few still bloomed stubbornly, refusing to die, even when the season turned against them. Love needs pruning sometimes, Jeremiah used to say. Or it'll choke itself. That night, I finally understood. But I didn't realize pruning love would come with thorns, because by the end of the week, both my children would return, not with apologies, but with war in their hearts. 3 days passed in silence. No calls, no messages. Just the sound of my own breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator to remind me I wasn't completely alone. I knew Kaylin well enough to expect this quiet. It wasn't peace, it was preparation. The calm before the storm. And the storm arrived on Thursday afternoon. A sleek black BMW rolled into my driveway. I didn't even have to look out the window to know who it was. Anaya never traveled without announcing herself, except when she wanted control of the situation. The car door slammed. She walked up the steps without knocking, trailed by her husband, Malik, who looked as nervous as a man walking into court. "Mom," she said, dropping her designer purse on the entryway table. "We need to talk." I kept watering the roses on the porch. "Good afternoon to you too, Anaya." Her tone sharpened. "Is it true what Kaylin told me?" I set the watering can down and faced her. "That depends. What exactly did he tell you?" She crossed her arms. "That you disinherited us. That you're leaving everything to Demani." "Please tell me that's not true." I motioned for her to sit. She hesitated, then perched on the edge of the sofa like it might bite her. Malik stood a few feet behind, pretending to check his phone. "It's true," I said evenly. "And it's not punishment, it's consequence." "Consequence?" she echoed, her voice rising. "Of what? Not attending a funeral?" The coldness in her tone was sharper than any knife. "You really think this is about a single day?" I said quietly. "Your father was sick for 6 months, Anaya." 6. You visited once, for less than 2 hours. And when he passed, you were on a yacht holding champagne. Her mouth fell open slightly. I was grieving in my own way. I laughed bitterly. "Grieving? You were celebrating." "Mom, that's not fair," she snapped. "You don't understand how much pressure I was under." "No," I interrupted, "I understand perfectly. You were under pressure to maintain your image. To keep up appearances, to post smiles for people who don't even know your middle name." She looked at Malik for support, but he just shifted awkwardly. "And what about Demani?" she continued, desperation creeping into her voice. "Why him? He barely knew Dad." The words hit me like a slap. "Barely knew him?" I repeated slowly. "Demani read to your father when his eyesight started failing. He helped organize his medication, mowed the lawn, drove me to the hospital on nights I couldn't drive. He knew him better than either of you did." "This isn't right," she said, standing abruptly. "We're your children. We're entitled to that inheritance." I looked her straight in the eyes. "You're entitled to my love, Anaya. You already had more of our money than I can count. You had chances, moments, years to show your father he mattered. You chose everything else instead." She glared at me, cheeks flushed with anger. "Dad would never have approved of this." "Your father," I said calmly, "sat in that chair for 6 months waiting for his children to come say goodbye. Don't talk to me about what he would approve of." Her voice broke. "This isn't over, Mom. Kaylin and I already spoke to a lawyer. You can't just erase us." I smiled faintly. "Actually, I can." And I did. She snatched up her purse and stormed out, Malik hurrying after her. The sound of their car peeling away echoed through the quiet street. I closed the door softly, not in anger, but in finality. Then I returned to the garden, picking up the watering can I dropped earlier. The sun had begun to set, and the roses glowed crimson in the fading light. They'd been through storms before. They always survived. So would I. But later that evening, when the phone rang again, and it wasn't my children, I realized the real battle hadn't even started yet. Someone else was about to drag me into a war I didn't see coming. The phone rang just as the evening light dimmed to gold. I assumed it was another round of calls from Kaylin or Anaya, maybe an apology, though that seemed unlikely. But when I glanced at the screen, the name made my stomach tighten. Owens and Associates. For a second, I froze. I had just finalized everything with attorney Owens less than a week ago. Why would he be calling now? I took a steadying breath and answered. "Hello?" "Mrs. Hampton," came his calm, professional voice. "I'm sorry to call so late. Something has come up that we need to discuss." My pulse quickened. "Is there a problem with the will?" He hesitated, never a good sign. "Not exactly. But your son and daughter contacted my office today. They requested copies of your estate documents." My grip on the phone tightened. "And did you give them anything?" Of course not, he assured quickly. I informed them that without your written consent, all information remains confidential. But Mrs. Hampton. His tone changed, cautious, almost uneasy. They've retained another attorney. Someone who's known for aggressive tactics. They might attempt to contest the documents before your passing. Contest? I repeated slowly. But the papers are airtight. They are, he said. Legally, they don't have much ground. But emotionally, publicly, they can still cause trouble. They could argue you were coerced, unstable, or influenced after Mr. Hampton's death. I let out a dry laugh. So they'll call me crazy, then? He sighed softly. It wouldn't be the first time a family has used grief to build a case. I just wanted to prepare you. Thank you, I said. But let them try. I've survived worse storms than this. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room, staring at the photo of Jeremiah and me on our 40th anniversary. His smile looked as calm and certain as ever. I could almost hear his voice whispering, "They'll come around, Eliza. Just give it time." But this wasn't about time anymore. It was about truth, and protecting what was left of it. I spent the next few days keeping busy. Cleaning drawers, pruning the garden, baking Jeremiah's favorite peach cobbler. Little rituals that reminded me who I was before the chaos. But in every quiet moment, I felt it, that tension building just beneath the surface, like the rumble of thunder before a storm. Then, on Sunday afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. My name is written in bold, uneven handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. Precise. Mrs. Hampton, we represent your children, Kaylin and Anaya. We request an immediate conversation regarding your recent amendments to your estate. Failure to respond will result in formal legal action. No signature, just a printed name, Harper and Miles Law Firm. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. They wanted to fight? Fine. Let them. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the letter wasn't the real threat. It was only the beginning. Because later that night, as I sat in the dim kitchen with my cup of tea, I noticed something strange. The light in Jeremiah's old study was on. I hadn't been in that room all day. And the door, it was slightly open. I froze. My heart started to pound. I knew I had turned off every light before dinner. Jeremiah's study had been locked since the funeral. I stood, whispering to myself, maybe I forgot. But when I stepped closer, I saw it, the faint smell of his cologne drifting from inside. And that's when I realized, someone had been inside my husband's study, and whatever they were looking for, it wasn't love or forgiveness. I stood there, frozen in the hallway, staring at the faint glow spilling from under the study door. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd lost track of my own steps earlier in the day. Grief does strange things to the mind, it blurs time, distorts memory. But then I smelled it again, Jeremiah's aftershave. That same cedar and sandalwood scent he wore every morning for 40 years. I hadn't opened that bottle since his death. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, too cold. When I turned it slowly, the hinges creaked like they were protesting. The light flickered weakly above the desk, the old bulb struggling to stay alive. At first glance, nothing looked out of place. Jeremiah's desk sat where it always had, cluttered with papers, pens, and one of his half-finished crossword puzzles. His reading glasses rested neatly beside a Bible, just the way I'd left them after his funeral. But then I saw the drawer. The bottom one on the left. It was open, just slightly, like someone had tried to close it in a hurry. Jeremiah had kept that drawer locked his entire life. Even I didn't have the key. He used to joke that it held state secrets, though I'd always assumed it was just bills or insurance papers. Now, it was open. I knelt beside it, my heart pounding. Inside, the contents looked disturbed. A few old folders, some yellowed envelopes, and one small leather-bound notebook. I picked it up carefully, flipping it open. The handwriting was unmistakably Jeremiah's, neat, strong, deliberate. But what was written inside made my breath catch. Dates. Names. Amounts. And at the top of each page, a single heading, private loans. I turned another page, scanning the entries. There were dozens of them, people I recognized, some I didn't. Neighbors, business partners, even a few of Kalen's old associates. Thousands of dollars, loaned quietly over the years. And many of the entries had a single word beside them, unpaid. I whispered to myself, Jeremiah, what were you doing? The final few pages were different. They listed larger amounts, hundreds of thousands, and one name appeared again and again, written in darker ink as though pressed harder into the paper. Kalen. Each line detailed a loan, some labeled emergency, others business expansion. But I knew the truth. They weren't loans, they were handouts. And then, one final entry at the bottom of the last page chilled me to the bone. March 2nd, $40,000. Anaya requested immediate transfer. Said it was for medical treatment. Suspect lie. We'll discuss later. The date was only a week before Jeremiah's second stroke, the one that took his life. My knees weakened. I sat down hard on the floor, the journal trembling in my hands. Could it be that in his final days, Jeremiah knew the truth about our children, that even then, they were still taking from him, still lying to him? A faint sound snapped me out of my thoughts. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I turned sharply toward the door, my pulse racing. Hello? I called out. No answer. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. Another faint sound followed, the soft closing of the front door. Whoever had been there was gone. I moved quickly through the house, checking locks, windows, every corner. Everything seemed untouched. But when I returned to the study, one thing was missing. The envelope with Jeremiah's death certificate, gone from the desk drawer. Someone had been inside my house. And they knew exactly what they were looking for. I locked the study door this time and pressed my back against it, whispering into the silence, Jeremiah, what have they done? Because whatever secrets my husband left behind, someone was desperate enough to break in, and soon, I'd find out just how far they'd go to bury them again. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak, every rustle of wind outside the window made me flinch. The air in the house felt different, heavier, like someone had left the door open to more than just the night. I sat in the living room with the lights on, Jeremiah's old notebook clutched in my hands. My mind replayed every detail, the open drawer, the missing envelope, the faint sound of the front door closing. Someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly what to take. By dawn, I had made up my mind. I called Attorney Owens first thing in the morning. Mrs. Hampton, he answered groggily, you're calling early. Is everything all right? No, I said quietly. Someone broke into my home last night. There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. Did you call the police? Not yet. Nothing's damaged, but something's missing, the envelope with Jeremiah's death certificate. That's odd, he murmured. Burglars don't usually take paperwork. Exactly, I said. This wasn't random. He exhaled heavily. Do you suspect anyone? I hesitated. I don't want to believe it, but my children are the only ones who would even know where to look. Mrs. Hampton, he said carefully, until we have proof, let's not make assumptions. But you're right to be cautious. I'll send over a security service I trust to install cameras and change your locks immediately. Thank you, I said softly. And please, make another certified copy of that certificate. Keep it safe. Already on it, he replied. After hanging up, I walked through the house, double-checking every door and window. The morning light revealed faint footprints near the study, muddy, fresh, and definitely not mine. Whoever came here hadn't even bothered to hide their trail. Later that day, Demani stopped by. The moment he saw my face, he frowned. Grandma, what's wrong? I tried to smile, but my voice wavered. Just didn't sleep well. He wasn't convinced. You look shaken. Did something happen? I sighed, motioning for him to sit. Someone broke in last night. They took some papers from your grandfather's study. His eyes widened. Did you call the police? I will, I said. But I think this was personal. He was silent for a moment, then leaned forward. Do you think it was Mom or Uncle Kalen? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He clenched his fists. If they did this, Grandma, they've gone too far. They already have, I said softly. But we won't accuse anyone without proof. After he left, I finally called the police. The officer who arrived was polite, efficient, and utterly unconvinced. Ma'am, he said, scanning the study with his flashlight, there's no sign of forced entry. Are you sure you locked the door? I'm sure, I replied firmly. Someone used a key, or knew how to get in. He wrote something in his notebook. We'll file a report, but without damage or witnesses, there's not much we can do. Of course there wasn't. When he left, I sat alone again, staring at the empty space where the envelope had been. It wasn't about the certificate. Whoever had taken it wanted something else, proof, maybe, or control. That evening, I went through Jeremiah's notebook again, hoping to find some clue. At the very back, tucked behind the last page, I found a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. It was a receipt. Dated a week before Jeremiah's death. The amount, $40,000. The recipient, Anaya Hampton. The memo line read simply, cash withdrawal, urgent family matter. My heart sank. It was true. He had confronted her before he died. And now, someone had made sure that record of his doubt was gone. But as I stared at that receipt, I didn't know the real shock was still ahead, because the next knock on my door wouldn't come from my family, or the police, it would come from a stranger who knew exactly what my husband was hiding. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps, firm, deliberate, unfamiliar. I wasn't expecting anyone. Demani had already called to say he'd be busy with exams all week, and Attorney Owens never dropped by without notice. My first thought was that it might be Kalen again, coming to argue, or worse, to threaten. I hesitated before opening the door. Through the small glass pane, I saw a man, mid-50s, wearing a gray suit, holding a folder under his arm. Not police, not a neighbor. I opened the door just slightly. Can I help you? Mrs. Hampton? His tone was polite, measured. My name is Daniel Rhodes. I'm an investigator with Harper & Miles law firm. The name made my stomach tighten. My children's lawyers. What do you want? I asked cautiously. He shifted slightly, not aggressive but assertive. I'd like to ask a few questions regarding your late husband's estate. Strictly procedural. It won't take long. I crossed my arms. Then you can talk to my lawyer. He nodded. I already have. But I thought it might be better to hear from you directly. Off the record. I frowned. And why would I do that? He hesitated, then said quietly, because what I'm about to tell you might change the way you see your husband. The air seemed to vanish from the room. I opened the door wider, just enough to let him in. 5 minutes, I said. He nodded respectfully and stepped inside, glancing briefly around the living room, his eyes pausing on the photo of Jeremiah and me on our anniversary. Your husband, he began, was known for being generous. He helped a lot of people over the years. But there are inconsistencies in his financial history. Records of large withdrawals with no clear recipients. Some appear legitimate, others, not so much. My heart thudded. I know about the loans, I said, keeping my voice steady. I found his notebook. He looked surprised. Then you know about the amounts? I do, I said. And I know who took advantage of him, his own children. He nodded slowly. Yes, but that's not all. He opened the folder and laid a document on the table. This, he said, was a wire transfer made 2 months before your husband's passing. $45,000. Sent to a woman named Marlene Foster. The name meant nothing to me. Who is she? That's what we're trying to determine, he said. But what's strange is that she listed your husband as her employer on a private lease application. I blinked, confused. Employer? Jeremiah retired 8 years ago. Exactly, he said quietly. We also found several phone calls between your husband's number and hers, at all hours. The last one was made 3 days before his death. I stared at him, my voice barely a whisper. Are you implying my husband was hiding something from me? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. I can't say that, ma'am. But your children intend to use this as evidence that your husband's financial decisions were compromised, that his judgment may not have been sound when the will was changed. The words hit like ice. They're going to drag his name through the mud just to get money. He gave a slow nod. It happens more often than you think. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Rhodes. But if you're working for them, I have nothing more to say. He stood, closing his folder. I understand. But Mrs. Hampton, if you find anything else, any records, letters, or notes, keep them safe. Because whether you know it or not, you're standing in the middle of a very complicated story. I walked him to the door, watching as he disappeared down the street. Then I turned back to Jeremiah's photo, whispering, What else did you keep from me, old man? But that night, when I searched Jeremiah's study again, I found something hidden beneath the floorboard, and it wasn't money, or papers. It was a key. A key with my husband's initials engraved on it. For the next hour, I just stared at the key lying in my palm. It was small, brass, worn at the edges, but unmistakably Jeremiah's. His initials were engraved in the center, J.H. The sight of them sent a shiver through me. Jeremiah had always been meticulous with his things. Every key on his ring had a purpose, a label, a place. But this one? I'd never seen it before. I held it up to the light, turning it between my fingers. It wasn't for anything in the house, that much I knew. The shape didn't match the locks on the doors, drawers, or even the shed outside. It was something different, something secret. My mind started racing through memories, small details I'd ignored over the years. Jeremiah disappears for an hour after his morning walks. His insistence on handling certain errands himself. The sealed envelopes he sometimes mailed without explanation. I felt that old ache in my chest, the mixture of love and doubt that comes when you realize you didn't know someone as well as you thought. Still, I needed answers. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to the shed, just in case. The air was cool and still, the kind that makes every creak sound like a whisper. Inside, I checked every cabinet, every drawer, even the floorboards. Nothing fit. Then, as I turned to leave, my beam of light caught something odd, an old wooden trunk in the far corner, half covered by a tarp. I'd seen it before, years ago, but Jeremiah had always brushed it off. Just old tools, he used to say. I pulled the tarp away. The trunk was locked. And when I slid the key into the rusted lock, it fit perfectly. My hand shook as I turned it. The latch clicked, loud in the silence. When I lifted the lid, a wave of dust and memories filled the air. Inside were stacks of manila folders, neatly arranged. On top of them lay a faded photograph, Jeremiah, standing beside a young woman I didn't recognize. She was smiling, maybe in her 20s, holding a small boy. I froze. The back of the photo had handwriting on it, Marlene and Toby, summer 1999. The same name the investigator had mentioned. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. My fingers trembled as I picked up one of the folders. Inside were old bank statements, lease agreements, and letters. Each one linked Jeremiah's name to Marlene Foster. Letter after letter, some typed, others handwritten. The earliest dated back more than 20 years. The most recent one stopped me cold. It was dated only a few months before he died. Jeremiah, thank you for helping with Toby's tuition again. I don't know what we would have done without you. He still doesn't know who you really are, and maybe that's for the best. You've done enough. Please rest now. I sat there, numb, my mind spinning. The words blurred together until only one thing echoed in my head. He still doesn't know who you really are. Toby. Her son. The truth clawed at me before I could even speak it aloud. Dear God, I whispered, pressing a trembling hand to my chest. Jeremiah, what did you do? Toby wasn't just some stranger's child. Jeremiah had been supporting him for years, paying his tuition, sending money, keeping it hidden from me. Was Toby his son? His secret family? Or something else entirely? A sound from outside snapped me back to the present, a car door slamming shut. I hurried to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. A black BMW. Parked across the street. Aenea's. She wasn't alone this time. A man stepped out of the passenger seat, tall, serious, holding a briefcase. And that's when it hit me, my daughter hadn't come back to reconcile. She'd come with her lawyer, and maybe, with enough ammunition to destroy both Jeremiah's memory and mine. The knock came moments later, 3 hard raps that rattled the door. This time, I didn't move right away. I stood frozen, the photograph of Marlene and Toby still clutched in my hand. When I finally opened the door, Aenea was standing there in a sleek black coat, her expression sharp as glass. Beside her stood the same man from the letterhead, Mr. Harper, one of the partners from Harper and Miles. Mom, she began curtly, we need to talk. Now. I stepped aside wordlessly. I see you brought company. The lawyer gave a polite nod, already opening his briefcase. Mrs. Hampton, thank you for allowing us in. This won't take long. Nothing involving lawyers ever takes long, I said dryly, motioning toward the living room. They sat across from me, Aenea crossing her legs with that same impatient grace she'd had since childhood. Harper cleared his throat. Mrs. Hampton, as you may already know, your son and daughter have concerns regarding recent changes to your estate. They believe these changes were made under emotional distress and may not reflect your true intentions. I leaned back in my chair. My true intentions are clearer than they've ever been. He adjusted his glasses, unfazed. We're also aware of certain financial irregularities involving your late husband. These records raise serious questions about the mental capacity under which some documents were signed. I felt the photo burning in my hand. And where did you get these records? Your children provided them, he said. They were found in the possession of a woman named Marlene Foster. She claims to have been financially supported by your husband for over 2 decades. Aenea's eyes flickered toward me, waiting for my reaction. I met her stare evenly. And what does she claim he was to her? Her words, Harper said carefully, were a father figure. She also mentioned a boy, Toby, whom your husband helped through school. My voice stayed calm, but my pulse thundered in my ears. A father figure, I repeated slowly. Convenient phrasing, isn't it? Aenea shifted in her seat. Mom, please don't get defensive. We just want to understand why Dad was hiding things from you, and whether you were aware of them when you changed the will. There it was. The real motive. I stood, clutching the photograph tighter. Do you even hear yourself, Aenea? You're digging up your father's memory to get to his money. That's not fair, she said quickly. If Dad had another family. Don't you dare, I snapped, my voice breaking for the first time. Don't you dare finish that sentence. The room went silent. Even Harper looked uneasy. I took a step forward, holding up the photograph. You want to know what I found? This. Your father helped someone who probably had no one else. That's who he was, generous to a fault. But instead of honoring that, you'd rather turn it into a scandal. Aenea's voice softened, but the coldness remained in her eyes. Mom, maybe you're too close to this to see clearly. I laughed bitterly. Close? I was married to that man for 43 years. You were barely there for 43 minutes when he was dying. Her lips parted, but no words came. Harper stood, closing his briefcase. Mrs. Hampton, we don't want conflict. But if you continue to withhold information relevant to the estate, we'll have no choice but to proceed legally. I met his gaze. Do whatever you must. But if you drag my husband's name through the mud, I'll spend my last breath making sure neither of you sees a dime. They left soon after, their car pulling away into the dusk. I stood at the window long after the taillights disappeared, my hands trembling, not from fear, but fury. They'd crossed a line they could never return from. Then my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. Mrs. Hampton, I think we need to talk about Marlene. She's not who your husband thought she was. And as I read those words, I realized Jeremiah's secret wasn't betrayal. It was protection. And now, whoever sent that message. They wanted me to finish what he started. The message replayed in my mind again and again. Mrs. Hampton, I think we need to talk about Marlene. She's not who your husband thought she was. The words were like ice against my skin. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, unsure if it was real, or another cruel trick from my children's lawyers. Then I noticed the sender's name. It wasn't a number I recognized, but it had an area code from Savannah, Georgia. Savannah. That's where Jeremiah used to go for his charity conferences. He'd make those trips every few months, staying a few days at a time. He'd always come home tired but peaceful, saying he needed time to clear his head. I typed back before my courage could fade. Who is this? The reply came almost instantly. My name is Toby Foster. I think your husband helped my mother. We need to meet. I read his name twice, my heart thudding in my chest. Toby, the boy from the photograph. After a long pause, I wrote back. Why now? Why contact me? A few dots appeared, then disappeared, as if he was struggling with what to say. Finally, the message came. Because my mother passed away last month. I found letters from your husband. He told her to contact you if anything ever happened to him. Said you'd know what to do. I dropped the phone onto the table, my fingers shaking. Jeremiah had planned this. Even in death, he had left a path, buried in secrets, but deliberate. I agreed to meet him the next morning at a small diner just outside the city. I didn't tell anyone. Not Demony, not Owens, and certainly not my children. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately. Late 20s, maybe 30. He had Jeremiah's eyes, calm, steady, kind. The resemblance was faint but undeniable. He stood when I approached. Mrs. Hampton? Yes, I said softly. You must be Toby. He nodded and gestured for me to sit. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. Then he slid a small envelope across the table. These are the letters I found after Mom passed. Inside were 3 neatly folded sheets, all written in Jeremiah's hand. Marlene, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You kept my secret when you didn't have to. You gave that boy a chance when I couldn't be there. Eliza would never forgive me if she knew the truth, but one day, maybe she'll understand. The second letter read. Toby's doing well, I hear. Keep him focused. He's not like Kaylin or Anea, he has patience, discipline. Maybe that's the best thing I ever gave him. I looked up, my throat tight. What does that mean? Toby hesitated. I used to ask Mom who my father was. She'd just say, he's a good man who can't be here. I didn't understand until now. He leaned forward, his voice soft. Mrs. Hampton. I think your husband was my father. The words hung between us, heavy and irreversible. I wanted to speak, but the air had left my lungs. Every suspicion, every ache, every quiet distance between Jeremiah and me, all of it suddenly made sense. He hadn't been hiding betrayal. He'd been hiding shame. I didn't come for money, Toby said gently. I just needed to understand why he never told you. Why didn't he ever tell me? Tears welled in my eyes. Because Jeremiah believed in keeping peace, even when it cost him the truth. Toby nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time someone finally tells it. I looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, if we open this door, there's no closing it again. He met my eyes and said quietly, Mrs. Hampton, that door's already open. And your children? They're about to walk through it, whether you're ready or not. When I got home from the diner, the world felt tilted, like everything I thought I knew had been quietly rearranged while I wasn't looking. Jeremiah's face on the mantel seemed different now. Familiar, but distant. Loving, but layered in secrets I had only begun to uncover. Toby wasn't just a name in a notebook. He was flesh, blood, and legacy, another part of Jeremiah's story that had existed alongside mine. For the rest of the day, I sat by the window, staring at the roses in the yard. Jeremiah's roses. Always blooming, no matter how many times life cut them back. Maybe that's why he planted them, to remind himself that some things grow again, even after being broken. I was still lost in thought when my phone rang again. Kaylin. I almost ignored it, but something in me said to answer. Mom, he said immediately, voice tight with anger, Anaya told me everything. You've been meeting with that boy. I froze. How do you know that? You think we wouldn't find out? He snapped. You're playing right into his hands, and we're not going to let you destroy Dad's name over some stranger's lies. He's not a stranger, I said quietly. He's your half-brother. There was a long, stunned silence. Then he laughed bitterly. That's ridiculous. It's the truth, Kaylin, I said, my voice breaking. Your father made mistakes, but he also took responsibility for them. He helped that boy, made sure he had what you and your sister always took for granted. Mom, he said sharply, do you even hear yourself? This con artist has gotten into your head. He's using you. For money, for sympathy, who knows what else? I took a slow breath. The only people who ever used me, Kaylin, share my last name. He went quiet. Then, in a low, cold tone, he said, if you side with him, don't expect us to stand by you when this all falls apart. I haven't had you standing by me in years, I whispered, and ended the call. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. An hour later, headlights swept across the living room wall. A car door slammed. Then another. I looked out the window, and saw both of them. Kaylin and Anaya. Marching toward the house. By the time they reached the porch, I was already standing at the door. Don't, I said firmly. Don't you dare bring your anger into this house. Anaya's voice cracked. You met with him, didn't you? With Toby? Yes, I said. And I wish you had too. Maybe then you'd see that your father wasn't the villain you're trying to make him. He cheated on you, Mom, she shouted. He lied to you. And now you're defending him? I'm defending the truth, I said. Your father wasn't perfect, but he didn't deserve this kind of hate from his own children. Kaylin's face hardened. We're not leaving until you hand over those letters. The ones he wrote to that woman. My chest tightened. How do you even know about those? We know everything, he said darkly. And if you won't give them to us, we'll get them another way. I stared at both of them, these people I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, and realized there was no trace of the children I once knew left in their eyes. Get out, I said, my voice low but firm. Mom. Out. They hesitated, then turned and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the frame shook. I locked it behind them and sank to the floor, tears streaming silently. I didn't know what hurt worse, the betrayal I'd discovered from my husband, or the cruelty I'd awakened in my children. Then my phone buzzed again. A message. From Toby. Mrs. Hampton, I think I found something at my mother's house. Something about your husband's will. You need to see this, tonight. And as I wiped my tears and grabbed my coat, I didn't realize that the truth Toby had found would change everything, not just about Jeremiah's past, but about my own future. The drive to Toby's house felt endless. The night was cool and quiet, the road empty except for my headlights stretching across the dark. My heart pounded with every turn, torn between fear of what I'd learn, and hope that, somehow, it might finally make sense. Toby lived in a modest brick home just outside Savannah. When he opened the door, his face looked tense, almost haunted. "Mrs. Hampton," he said softly, "thank you for coming." I didn't know who else to call. I stepped inside. The living room was small, lined with books and photographs. On the table lay a stack of papers and a small lockbox. "This is what I found," Toby said, gesturing toward the box. It was hidden behind my mother's dresser. "There's a note inside addressed to you." I froze. "To me?" He nodded and handed it over. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the yellowed piece of paper. "Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you myself. There are things I should have said years ago, truths I was too afraid to face. Marlene was a good woman who helped me when I made the worst mistake of my life. Toby was not my son by blood. He was her nephew. His parents died in a car accident, and she couldn't afford to care for him alone. I stepped in to help. I wanted to tell you, but you'd already lost faith in me once before, and I couldn't bear to see that look in your eyes again. You always told me love means forgiveness, Eliza. I hope, wherever I am, you'll find it in your heart to forgive me. Not for what I did, but for what I couldn't say. If you meet Toby, please help him the way I did. He's a good soul. The kind you and I always wanted our children to become." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. Jeremiah hadn't been unfaithful. He had been protective. Quietly supporting a child who wasn't his, because that's who he was, a man who gave without seeking recognition. I looked up at Toby, my heart aching. "He did love you, Toby. Just not in the way we both thought." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I figured as much. I just wanted you to know. I didn't want this story twisted by people who never cared to understand him." I nodded, gripping his hand. "Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing." Before I left, he handed me one last envelope, Jeremiah's handwriting again. "For Eliza. To be opened when you're ready." I didn't open it until I was home. The house was dark, the air still. I sat by the window, the same place I'd once cried over his casket, and unfolded the letter. "My love, if you ever read this, remember, you were my home. Everything I built, everything I gave, began and ended with you. I tried to do good in this world, even when it meant keeping things from you. But I never stopped loving you. Please, don't let bitterness be what our children inherit. Teach them grace, even if they don't deserve it yet." That night, I finally forgave him. Days later, I called Attorney Owens. I didn't undo the will, but I made one small change. I added a clause giving Kaylin and Anea a chance to earn back a portion, if they could prove, through kindness, not court, that they'd learned something about love and legacy. Because forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. As I placed Jeremiah's letter beside his photo, the morning light crept into the room, soft and warm. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt alive again. I whispered, "You were right, Jeremiah. Love doesn't end with the grave. It just finds new ways to bloom." And outside, the roses swayed in the sunlight, red, stubborn, and alive. Before we go, remember, truth doesn't always destroy, sometimes, it rebuilds. If you felt this story in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive if love was the reason behind the secret? Because sometimes, the biggest betrayals aren't about lies, they're about the love we're too afraid to explain.